There's always somebody out there trying to con, bad actors trying to take advantage of you. And it's a bit of a game of chess because the technology, the people are always trying new things and you're trying to keep up with them.
In this episode, we speak to Scott Newby. Scott is the Chief Compliance Officer and Money Laundering Reporting Officer for UK-based FinTech Shieldpay.
You're not going to get everything right. Whatever you try, you're going to make a decision, but it's not always going to be the right decision. Documenting the reason you made that decision. Show your workings, just like in maths. When you do that exam, remember your teacher says 80% of the mark is show your workings, and it's exactly the same because once there's a documented rationale and it makes sense, something goes wrong, you've actually explained why you've done it.
I put a message into a FinTech founders group.
Yeah.
And Pete and I have spoken before. So Pete's the CEO of the company you work
Correct,
for.
Yeah.
He got straight in touch with me and was like, I know the guy who should be on your podcast. But we were just speaking outside and you haven't done one of these things before. So it's a little bit of a thing, isn't it?
Yeah.
So could you do me a favour? What's your name, the company you work for, and what's your job title? Let's start there.
Right. My name's Scott Newby. I'm the Chief Compliance Officer and MLRO at Shieldpay.
So I'm new to this industry to a certain extent. I'm like 5 years, right?
Yep.
So by being the Chief Compliance Officer and the MLRO, sometimes those two jobs are separate.
Correct, yep.
Why have you got both? Are you just greedy?
I wish I could get rid of the MLRO title, but no. Typically within the payment space and a growing fintech, you do both roles.
Right.
Just on a couple of reasons. A, typically these are growing firms, so they're trying to manage their resource appropriately. Yeah. We've got a team of 70 people and it's growing.
Yeah.
So being able to do both gives you that more holistic approach.
Yeah.
But typically as firms get bigger and bigger, those roles start to break out and then you have the Chief Compliance Officer and MLRO. So typically at the bigger banks, they're definitely split roles just purely from a capacity perspective. But for the smaller firms where they only have so much sort of resources, both people, financial, both of the roles are together.
Gotcha. So like right at the top level, and I try and make sure that I can explain stuff like to my nan.
Yeah.
MLRO and the person that runs compliance, whether that's head of compliance, chief compliance officer, what's the like fundamental differences between the two if they were to be separate roles?
It's some of it is people's preference. They more go for the rules and regulations from compliance, and then there's the more fun part, which is the MLRO part. Right. So that's the bit I really like, because what you're always trying to do is there's always somebody out there trying to con, bad actors trying to take advantage of you, and it's a bit of a game of chess because the technology, the people are always trying new things and you're trying to keep up with them. So
that money laundering reporting officer is the person that's got to be like hot on the tails of the people that are trying to do stuff.
The bad actors, whereas the compliance for me is that more internal, overarching, these are all the rules that you must comply with from a compliance perspective. You follow that, whereas the money laundering, again, it's got a whole set of rules associated with it. But actually, it's much more, you get involved in technology, you're trying to understand how that fraudster, that bad actor is trying to come in and use your basically firm to launder their funds.
Love
and
it.
Clean them.
And I've said this to a couple of people, but I find it such a privilege that someone like you who knows this stuff so well has bothered to come in and do this. So A, thanks very much. B, this has been amazing. So we've done this on the second season. We didn't do it on the first. It's just a little bit of fun.
Yeah.
4 quick fire questions. And then I want to get into your like amazing career history that's so entwined in the industry that I now work in. So number one, if you could have any job in the world for one day, just 24 hours, what would it be and why?
Interesting question. There's a few, but I'm going to go, I'm a big cycling fan. So having a day in the car of one of the tours, one of the stages on the Tour de France, going up the Alpe d'Huez would just be amazing. Watching how those cyclists can cycle up gradients that just look nigh on impossible at 15, 16 miles an hour as they're going up after 8 hours of cycling. It's perfect.
Wild. I remember reading, what was it? I think it was maybe the Lance Armstrong autobiography, and he was talking about the fine margins, pedal placement and all that sort of stuff. And I had no idea how optimized it was. But then you look at the performance stats and it has to be. because it's that elite. Amazing. Okay. Best piece of advice you've ever received?
Best piece of advice, and it relates back to my job, is you're not going to get everything right. And you actually have to acknowledge that whatever you try, you're going to make a decision, but it's not always going to be the right decision, because hindsight's a wonderful thing. But actually, especially being a head of compliance and chief compliance officer or an MLRO, it's documenting the reason you made that decision.
Show your workings, right?
Show your workings. Just like in maths, when you sort of do that exam, remember your teacher says 80% of the mark is show your workings. And it's exactly the same, because once there's a documented rationale and it makes sense, if something goes wrong, you've actually explained why you've done it. And then in hindsight, you can go, well, actually, we didn't realise that was going to happen. So that's the advice, and I think that's stuck with me.
It has to as well. One of the things I'm really interested to dig into as we go through your personal journey through your career is how the pressure has ramped up over time. And I have a feeling that that's one of those things that will be one of the things that's helped ease that pressure. What's the one thing you're really proud of?
So one of the things I'm really proud of is I'm sort of starting to get a bit older now. So I'm at the twilight part of my career. So I've always been a short distance sprinter runner, but I've just taken up high rocks. So I've got my big birthday this coming August, and I've set myself a target, and I've done my first 2. And to actually get round and complete a high rocks session has been one of the proudest things I've done, because that has actually nearly killed me in the training. But I'm doing another one in 4 weeks' time.
Oh, where's that?
Barcelona.
And mate, what a cool thing to fly somewhere to go do an event as well, right?
Yeah, so go and do that on Friday, and then go and enjoy the sangria in the weekend in the sun afterwards.
The spoils.
Yeah.
I did one in November, I think it was in London.
Yeah.
I stupidly didn't train for it, and I was running up to so you do the run and then you do the exercise, and I was running up to the exercise being like, what's this? Asking the marshals what it was. But it's great fun, right? It's a good thing to lock into.
Yeah, so that whole hybrid thing. So I'd done my first one last October in Birmingham, and I'd done one in Dublin. But that's just a completely different way of training for me, and actually going from being able to do 1 8K runs, do a whole load of exercise in between, and still not pass out. That's what I'm proud of.
So what was the training that you were doing before?
So a lot of it was, because I'm a sprinter, sort of power type athlete. So a lot of it was high intensity training for 30 minutes. That was easy. And then having to do an 8K run with a lot of exercise and taking an hour and a half to do it, that was completely different.
So the sprint stuff, were you competing? Were you racing?
Yeah, so I was in there doing the competition in Birmingham, so with about 10,000 other people.
Check it out. Love it. What's the most... This question makes me laugh, because some of the answers we've had have just been so ridiculous. No pressure. What's the most ridiculous thing you believed as a child?
Oh, God. Well, I'd moved to sort of Ireland when I was young, so that whole thing of my mum and dad telling me, you've always got to look out for the rainbow, and at the end of it there's a leprechaun, and there's a pot of gold there. It's probably got to be one of the sort of most silly things you believe in.
But you actually believe it as well, right? And you see a rainbow and you're like, hang on.
Yeah.
Epic. So that actually draws us on quite nicely. So you, as a kid, you were in Ireland?
I was in Southern Ireland, yes.
Okay, until what age?
So I came back to university in Cardiff when I was 18, so I moved over there when I was 10 and spent 8 years over there.
So from like a secondary school perspective, academic, not academic, like which side of the fence were you on? Were you a bit of both?
I was a bit of both. I played a lot of rugby, rowing, cycling, sort of running, which was great in Ireland because sport's a big thing over there. So also touched on Gaelic football, but I went back to the traditional of rugby.
Yeah.
So I was lucky that we had a really good school that was good academically and also sports.
Yeah.
So yeah, I was never say I was going to be top of the class, but I had a good sort of education.
Yeah, nice.
Got me into university. And
did you ever want rugby to be a thing? If rugby was, did you ever want to have a go?
Look,
we all did, right?
We all did. Yeah, I thought I wanted to be the Jeremy Guscott of that era. But I realised sort of after coming over to Cardiff, I went to UWIC, which is a big university focused on rugby.
Yeah. The Archers, is that what they? Is it the Archers? The nickname? Because it's what's the badge for UWIC?
Oh God, I can't remember what the nickname is now. That's appalling. So hopefully you'll cut this part from it. But when I came over, I was playing a good standard in sort of Ireland.
Yeah.
Came over here and it just went up a whole nother level, and it was like, I was nowhere I was going to get into their first team. I was in the second team, and that was tough and taking me. And then I realised, I'm not going to make rugby, but I then just enjoyed it till I sort of turned about 30 and then hung my boots up going, my brain and my legs are going at two different paces.
Yeah. It's fun. I think everybody reaches that natural point in rugby where you're like, I can't go up to that next level, right? And it's quite a hard thing. We had Alex Pillow on here, and he's at Moody's, and he had a similar thing. He did a bit of county in his teams, and then got to this next bit. It was like, oh, actually, they're a bit big and a bit fast, and all this other stuff. So when you went to uni, what did you go to uni to study?
So I went down when I was in Ireland, I lived in a place called Killarney. So small, big tourist area. So there was, during the height of the season, there was more tourists than there was locals. So I got into the hotel and catering trade. So I'd done a hotel and catering degree in Cardiff.
I love this, because now you're doing this. So all right, so you go to Cardiff to do hotel and catering degree.
Correct, yeah.
I naturally question whether you need a degree to do those things, because surely you just work in a hotel and you know how to do it by doing it. What was a degree in hotel and catering like?
So I can tell you all about the different shag piles of a carpet. I can tell you all the different cleaning materials, how to do projects on that. I think part of it is actually a good sort of chunk of the course you're out actually in business.
Okay.
But actually, there's a lot going on within a hotel. That some of these are very big businesses. So you've got to understand the sort of financial side, the accounting side, the management, the people side. It's all of that, because if you think about a hotel, you can have 100 plus people working in there. You've got some very senior people to the more juniors. Quite often they're sort of part-time. A lot of them, especially in peak season, they're out of school. So trying to motivate and win hearts and minds and managing that whole team is very different. So getting that skill, and that was one of the ways I developed as a person around leading, watching really good sort of hotel managers get people that were really tired coming in on the day off, getting them to work extra hours, all of that in a way of it wasn't just always about we'll give you an extra 5 hours sort of work and we'll pay you. It's actually getting people to believe and sell that sort of journey.
Isn't that? I've never thought about so a good friend is the MD of the Rosewood Hotels, which is stunning, right? And I speak to him often about it, but I've never really considered, like, we've talked about how you manage occupancy rates and all that sort of stuff, but I've never really considered much about the people management side of it. And that, like you say, it's seasonal workers, it's, part-time, it's school leavers, it's all that sort of stuff. What an amazing management role running a hotel is. I've never really considered that. Yeah,
and it's that thing is the sort of strongest and the weakest part of the hotel is your people. So your weakest link is that one that potentially you've got the wrong person, you've got somebody that's coming in doing a review for the restaurant, for the hotel, and then they're making a decision based on that interaction with an individual. If that gives a bad sort of expression of the hotel and the service, that can have a material impact. And we didn't have the whole... not Trustpilot, TripAdvisor, get the right one. We had none of that, but it was word of mouth and paper articles and all of those. So actually getting the people motivated, dressed correctly, all of those things, and just working all through to one goal of that customer's at the heart of everything you do, actually has a very different sort of view, as well as all that occupancy rate, sort of food and portion control and all those. Because
it's a fine margin business as well, right?
It is. Yeah.
Fascinating. So you've such a good grounding. I'm just thinking more and more about. So you've gone to Cardiff to go to uni to study hotel and catering.
Yeah.
Like, what then?
So I then sort of decided when I finished my degree, I went back out into sort of work, and I got offered a few roles, and it all started to go, hang on a minute, they want me to work how many hours every weekend? And I'm thinking, no, this isn't right. And I was really lucky. My parents ran a shop in Ireland, a tourist shop. So I always used to go and do the banking with my dad, and I got to know the bank people sort of really well as I was growing up. I used to work in the shop and always have to run over and get change because at that time cars weren't really a thing. And always were intrigued with how these people used to decide on lending. And sort of went, no, hotel and catering isn't for me. And then I went to all the milk rounds as you used to do. And it was like, oh, let's go and see a bank. That sounds quite exciting.
Yeah.
And applied for a number of roles and joined the HSBC training program.
So part of the reason you got into this at all is because you wanted to work 9 to 5, not when other people weren't working.
Yeah. I actually wanted some of my weekends back because if my boss is listening and say I work 9 to 5, I'm probably going to get shot. But it was that part of you work when everybody's socialising.
Yeah, I've always found that hard about hospitality. It's really tough.
And that was the bit of going, yes, I'm getting a bit older. No, I enjoyed it, and I would always love in the future, probably one of the other things when you ask me what was my most favourite job, I'd love to run an old country pub with a gastro sort of food to it in the future. Nice. But yeah, that's how I got working all those unsociable hours and most weekends and every sort of Christmas was, let's do something a bit different.
How did, because it's got to be a little bit of a, not difficult shift, but you've gone from something that's high energy and social to a bank's training program apprenticeship. Like that must have been a bit of a shock jumping from one to the other.
It was an interesting, it was very different from going in. I think the really good thing about all of these banks, with these training programs they have, they really support the individuals. And I was really lucky when I joined in the Crewe branch, where I took because I was positioned in the Cheshire area, so my base branch was Chester, but then I started working out the Crewe branch. But I had a really sort of typical old-fashioned bank sort of manager there who sort of took me under his wing and really sort of helped train me all the way through and supported me. And he was, again, if it wasn't for that whole influence that they bring around taking them out on client visits and learning, and he's teaching you, and that whole coaching part around what would you do, how did you find that meeting really interesting, and you're just learning and you get involved in so many different things.
And I should imagine that compared to some of the other people that are on that scheme, because of the experience that you've got, A, playing sports, but B, in hospitality, you probably stood out. You're probably quite a good person on the course, right?
I think it was difficult because I remember I was on the counter and the counter manager probably wanted to string me up because trying to get the tills to balance at the end of every day was not one of my sort of strong points. But I've heard that a few times. The bit I liked about it was that whole interaction when I moved off of the counter and into, typically when you go into a branch and you go and meet people and you're going through initially, they're opening a bank account, opening a sort of coming in to open a loan. And then actually it's just that conversation, sort of why I'm here today, of just talking to people and listening to what they're doing, why they're doing it. And you just have that great ability to learn about people, but also what became quite interesting was then realising, why does he want this? What's he doing here? It was you started to question, like that doesn't seem sort of right, and you start to build that up over time.
Were there early instances where things had gone wrong?
So touch wood, no.
Or was it just being inquisitive?
It was just being that whole inquisitive thing, because when somebody's saying a loan, you'd start asking, because it was at that point it was a checklist. You used to follow the questions down. And then you'd ask some questions, sort of what's your role? And they would say sort of their salary or something. And then you go, okay, so can you provide me with 3 sort of wage slips to back that up? And they go, oh, yeah, so I know I need to amend it because my salary's changed. And you go, hang on a minute, why? So it was some of those things, and you go, and it was always interesting watching people go, I'm not sure, let me just go and check my sort of thing and get my wage slip out and confirm, to as others, you knew that they weren't necessarily telling the whole truth and all the truth.
How quickly did you get responsibility for decision making, or was there always somebody else that you had to refer, like a case that you'd built as a part of an application?
I think, I can't remember exactly when. So the first few years you do your 6 month on all the different areas. and then I went into sort of business banking. And they, over time, you built up accreditations, and then you got your certain limits and certain scores. If it was of this credit quality, you could lend Y, and there was credit scoring in the background.
Are they bank specific, those accreditations?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, because from sort of Lloyds to HSBC to others, they've all got different ways that they will give authorities out to business banking managers and that.
Interesting. At what point when you were going through the, like, because you've just gone, I'll go on this scheme.
Yeah.
When you were like, well, this is my career now.
I sort of really enjoyed it. I think, so I went through sort of your traditional banking, then I got to met a really good friend and got into sort of invoice finance. So that's typically where you're funding the invoices for a business. And I got involved in that, and that's when I moved from HSBC over to Lloyds. So I spent probably 2.5 years of probably what was some of my most exciting times, because within that career, the first 18 months I was sort of managing, and then I got into the more interesting high-risk cases where actually I was managing some clients that had been defrauding us.
So when you say managing clients that had been defrauding you, do you retain them as clients, but you work out the things that they were doing wrong and continue working with them, or was your job to cut them off?
No, well, ideally you want to go out, but unfortunately, quite often there was what we used to call hole in the ledger. So, i.e., there was a deficit,
right,
and therefore you were having to work with them to correct your security.
Because there can be accidents as well, right? People file stuff wrong. It's not necessarily malicious.
Yeah, and we've had it where somebody accidentally had that whole fat finger and put an extra zero on.
The old fat finger.
The whole fat, but you knew that they were there because they'd literally phone you up in sort of 4 hours. Oh God, I've done this. I'm going to send. And you knew the people that had done it in by error, because purely on that basis of timing, how quickly. Whereas others, they were just so cynical. They knew exactly what they were doing.
Learnings that you must see. I do often think about because like in the business that I'm in, we're like, you know, automation, all that sort of stuff.
Yeah.
But the retained knowledge that people have in compliance teams is like a really powerful thing, isn't it? And that's one of the things that I think is going to be really hard to distribute to all these new technologies that are coming in, like the retained knowledge of compliance teams, which you'd have seen.
Yeah, and if I think my biggest learning sort of for me as a sort of an MLRO, so I wasn't natural. I didn't come up all my career thinking I wanted to be an MLRO or head of compliance. Yeah. But when I sort of look back on my sort of career, that time of spending probably 6 years, I've probably got that wrong, but it's around 6 years in the whole invoice finance. And I was lucky I got 6 months with PwC on secondment as well in their insolvency and investigations team.
Oh, wow.
Spending that and being involved in cases of people defrauding you, because I'm in B2B, so business to business. So that whole wealth of experience I built there has been so powerful, because actually there's not much I've not seen what businesses can do when they're under pressure. Yeah. And a lot of it is when they get into financial distress, they will do things. Yeah. Not everybody, but there are certain, and that whole experience of having some really interesting cases where management clients I've had that literally within 3 or 4 weeks, you've realised they've taken hundreds of thousands of pounds, and then you're looking, when it comes back to that automated, we have certain trends that you spot, you get those alerts, but there is that time gap, and it's trying to instill some of that experience in the new people coming through that are used to technology. They pick the phone up, they can Google, and it's going to actually think about how a business works, how does it work, what are their stress points? When are they going to do stuff?
So as you were coming up, do you feel as though like intuition was expected? So like your bosses, were they saying like, you know, think critically about this? Because like now, people, like you say, people will get a data point and they'll go, oh, there's the data point. Was it, because I don't feel as though intuition is encouraged as much anymore because data's the ruler. Was intuition encouraged as you were coming up?
Yeah, and it's one of those, and hopefully my team, when they sort of listen to this, to me, when I sort of get somebody to come and talk to me about a financial crime file, an AML file, what I want, I'll park it and say, well, okay, so tell me what you think the risks are. I want them to think critically around what are they looking at, what are they assessing, why are they assessing it? And that was always the way. I remember sort of sitting in Banbury at Lloyd's of when I had my first fraud case. I was only sort of in my 20s thinking, oh my God, my life's come to an end. How's this happened? And my sort of boss taking me through it bit by bit.
Well, so this is just so I'm clear, this is on your watch. Something slipped through the net and something's gone wrong. Okay.
Something had gone through. So every bank manager will have had this. They've lost some money.
Yeah.
But actually, that first learning has stayed with me since that day, because you think, how have I not spotted that? How have I not spotted this? It's those trends. And to me, that whole thing of just always questioning what you're seeing and why.
Yeah.
And try not to become too cynical, because
That was going to be my question.
yeah, you've got to get that balance right. But it's been, as you come into that point of being inquisitive. And I think people, because of now all the technology, I question how people set it up and the rules they set it up on. But to me, it's actually taking it back and being, well, be that inquisitive, ask that question, why are you doing that? What risk are you trying to solve?
Yeah.
It's always coming back to, why do you think that's a risk? What's it going to solve? And then get and work the data points. Don't try the other way around.
Do you feel as though, like in this, like let's call it like this first third of your career?
Yeah.
Do you, because they're also formative years, right? So you're like mid-20s or whatever.
Yeah.
You said you made a really interesting point there, trying not to be too cynical.
Yeah.
Did you ever find that because you were in a world where being cynical is almost essential, did that ever transfer out of work?
Yeah, my other half would definitely say
Do you know what I mean?
that.
Because people say don't take your work home and all this sort of stuff, but you're in something that's so high pressure and so important, and it's beginning to become ingrained in you that you're cynical. Did it change you as a person at all? It might not have, of course, but...
No, you always look at it. I suppose you just got to look at the news and you read something and you go, is this true? What is it? You ask a lot more questions of things. I don't always just read something, take it at face value, which is probably half of my thing. And when things go wrong, it's like going, why did that go wrong? What's happened here?
Yeah.
So you do become, over the time. But I think what I've also done as I've become slightly older and more mature in my through my career, you start to understand that balance, right? Because when you were going, well, hang on a minute, you're young, you think you know stuff, then you sort of pick a few frauds out and you become really good, and then you catch a cold again.
Yeah, there's that back down to earth thing, isn't there?
You come down with a bump, and I think that, and I talk to my team and that over my career, and I give some live examples around some of the cases and the frauds and things that I've had to manage, catch, be caught out on. Some of those horrible experiences, having to go to court for 2 to 3 days and stand in the box and sort of give evidence of why you've made those decisions.
Show your workings.
Show your workings again, yeah. And that's why I said you're not going to get everything right, and you've got to reflect that it's getting that real balance. And that's why,
Funny. So you're getting to the point where you're like owning cases and things now. At some point, you then went to RBS.
I moved to sort of RBS. So I was looking for a promotion, didn't get that at sort of Lloyd's. And unfortunately for Lloyd's, RBS came sort of knocking. And they offered me the role I was looking for. So I moved over and spent 12 good years at...
12 good years. So you were with Lloyd's. Where in the country were you?
So again, I'd lived in the Northwest for 4 years after finishing uni. Then I moved over to Nottingham, and I've lived in sort of Nottingham ever since.
Oh, nice. So when you went to RBS, you were still in Nottingham?
Yeah.
Is that because? So forgive me. Is there like a big fraud and compliance team for RBS?
No,
Like how,
it was purely where I'd moved to. It was good because I was given the patch at Lloyd's of the East Mids, so
Okay.
East Midlands.
Yeah.
That was the role I was recruited for in RBS because I was on patch.
yeah,
Their main office was in sort of Birmingham and Feltham.
yeah.
But it was, again, I could get down to Feltham quite easily in the car.
So you, is it like, and again, forgive my ignorance, so you're running like an area to make sure there's no fraud happening from the branches in that area?
So at that point I used to work in at that time I moved up into the commercial bank team. So
Okay.
there was a number of commercial centres. There was Nottingham, there was Leicester, there was Derby, there was Lincolnshire. So I had a portfolio of clients that I managed across that,
Okay.
and it was around managing those risks.
So at this point, you are in compliance. Like, that's
No,
your career?
So I'm not in compliance. I'm still a banking relationship manager.
So you're not
That's
even
why-
in compliance?
I'm
Oh,
not
okay,
even
fine.
in compliance now.
Wow. So you're not even like.
So I'm not in the compliance world yet.
Oh,
So
wow.
my first half of my career was what I would call your first line, doing that true relationship management style role. And then I got some promotions at sort of RBS, and I worked with a great guy called Mike Bardrick, who was the COO at RBS Invoice Finance. He brought me over as a head of business management, and that
Right.
was my first time I dipped my toe into compliance and financial crime.
So it just happened to be part of what you were doing before. There was an element of it.
There was an element of it, yes.
Fine. And so do you think, like, what interested you about it?
So I'd spent a lot of time, and we were going through a whole replatform. So we're bringing in a new CRM system, and I was asked to become one of the SMEs. And that's how I got into compliance and financial crime, because I had to go and get all of the approvals from what was mum and dad, i.e. RBS Big Bank at that point, because we were one of the subsidiaries. And naturally, out of doing that project, a role came up to look after sort of invoice finance and Lombard in a compliance and financial crime. And it was going, and a risk perspective, and it was going, well, Scott, you've basically doing it.
Yeah.
There's the opportunity, and that's how I got into it. So again, it was never planned.
That's why this is called this. But
Oh yeah, why it's called Not What I Expected. But the really interesting thing from me was actually, to me, it was a natural progression, because I like technology. I like that whole part of understanding what clients are doing and protecting, and by default, you're actually doing financial crime in a certain thing. You're just not going to the depths that an analyst would do at that point.
Gotcha. So how long did you say you were at RBS in total?
12 years. So my first 6 years of that was in the more relationship management side. And then I moved more into the operational risk, compliance world from a first line perspective, and then into financial crime.
So of the two halves, like, clearly very, very different. But
Yeah.
by the time you leave, you're a completely different professional to when you
correct,
arrived, right?
yeah.
So by the time you left, given how long you'd spent in it, did you feel as though you were like assured in being somebody in compliance and like, I've seen enough now, I'm confident in my role in this industry? Because there comes a time in everybody's career where they feel that, right? You're like, I know what I'm about, I know what I do. Did you feel as though you were there, or was there more to learn?
You were always learning, even now that I've spent sort of 25 years in the whole sort of and probably more. I'm learning every day. And if somebody says they're not learning, then it's time to get out.
Yeah. And the threats change, right?
The threats change. Because I'm a sort of compliance risk person, I was lucky I took the opportunity of redundancy, but that was my safety net. So I thought, I'm confident in my own ability.
Yeah, nice.
But I'm not necessarily sure I'm fully able to do it. So I thought, I've got a nice sort of redundancy package. I'll go and try the FinTech world. And that gave me the confidence. If it didn't go well, I had some money and I could sort of to keep my thing.
Yeah.
It's that whole balancing your sort of risk and reward. Then I got into growing FinTech. And
how was the change? Because you've worked apart from some early stuff in hotels, you worked in banks, right?
Yeah.
I know I know more about what fintechs are like, but the difference, was that not enormous?
Oh, it's huge. I must admit, and I still speak to people I hire now out of the banks that come into fintechs. I said, first 3 months is a whirlwind. Because you are moving so fast.
And the company you join won't be the company that's there in 3 months as well.
Correct, yeah. And so I joined again. So I'd come out, I joined a sort of international supply chain finance company. Okay. There was 87 people in there when I joined. And they were going, now you're in charge of financial crime, you're in charge of compliance, you're in charge of the operational risk. And it's going, there you go, get on with it.
Really?
And you go, okay, right. Hang on a minute. I can't phone Bob. I can't phone Fred.
There's not that other department.
There's not that other department. It's me.
Yeah.
And you sit there and you go, oh dear God, what have I done?
Because you've got to look up. So there's those 3 areas, but you're also looking after the people that are delivering that stuff, the technology that you're managing upwards for the budget to try and get those things for the first time. That must have been pretty full on.
Yeah. So I was lucky because I had a huge amount of experience. I'd looked after a couple of execs at RBS. I had that knowledge around sort of what a financial crime risk assessment looked like. I sort of led on some of those. Also had that not direct engagement with the regulator, but I was seeing all those requests coming in and helping with the responses via our second line team. But when you come out, and then I really learned very quickly that you've got to build a network. And to me, that is sort of one of the key takeaways I would tell anybody that's coming up in their career is build a network of people.
Internal network, external network? Both. External. Okay.
Because you're going to always come across something you've not seen.
So the network, the benefit of the network in this context predominantly is someone to be at the end of the phone to think, I haven't seen, like, what do you think this is?
Yeah.
Yeah, wow, okay.
And you got to be a whole lot careful of confidentiality and all of that. But
you can give a scenario without specifics. You can give
scenarios and stuff like that. But I think one of the things, I've worked with some very good people, and I've been lucky that some of those have moved with me and they've gone on to do, I know that I've got a list of people I can pick the phone up to and say, I've got this scenario, what have you thought?
Yeah.
What about this?
And then you become that person to other people as well in the other direction. Yeah, great.
And you get phone calls and you say, what about this? And how does that work? Because I do sort of worry, because I've had a big grounding background before I took that first step into being an MLRO. But then I see these MLROs that have come in, have got 3-4 years of experience. And you go, have you learnt that? And I'm not saying that they shouldn't have those roles. But have they got all of those networks? Have they seen everything? But I was really lucky when I joined that I got that support network around being able to hire good people that knew technology, that had done certain things to help build that sort of financial crime network out. But you go and take your first financial crime risk assessment to your first sort of risk committee where you're presenting it as the formal MLRO, and you go, this is it, and this is my MLRO report. It's going, my name's at the bottom of that, and I've got personal accountability and liability. And you go,
of course. But that's how you get better, right? You put yourself
correct.
You put yourself out there. Fair play, because it's different because I like over my career, the people I've been known have been typically more like commercial people. Yeah, that's why I love doing this, because I get to speak to people like you. Like, so for me, if I think of like big jobs that I've got in the past, it's like, okay, now I own a 20 million revenue number. Yeah, but that's not owning fraud. Like, that's a very different thing. If you perform, you get rewarded. Whereas if you don't perform, the whole company gets screwed. Correct. It does, yes. Which is such a different thing. And it's such a. I'm always fascinated. I'd love to know your view. The tension between compliance and revenue and commercial and go to market and all that sort of stuff, right? Because I often don't think that they realise the pressure that your side of the shop is under. And actually, you're not trying to stitch them up. You're actually just trying to protect the whole business. Could you talk to that a little bit, like that?
Yeah, and it's so if people Google, I worked for an interesting company called Greensill. That was the supply chain finance company. Yeah. And that went from a material growth to unfortunately ending up going into insolvency. Yeah. So I saw from start to finish. Now, as you can sort of Google some of the characters that were involved in that, one of the things coming back to your question, and the regulators all been through it, was there was always a healthy tension. But whenever I came and declined something from a financial crime perspective, yes, I got challenged, as you would expect. Never did that absolute decision of going, no, ever get overruled. And to me, that would be my sort of red line to exit a business, because that whole culture, even where I am at Shieldpay, there's that healthy tension, and I sit on the exco, and I sort of also have a dotted line into our chairman. So if there is ever that a decision that we can't get and decide between the sort of the business, we would have a sort of mini risk committee, and we discuss the case.
I've seen that more and more, the dotted line above the founder or CEO or whatever else. I've seen that more and more, actually.
So you have that sort of conflict line, as you could say. But to me, I've seen it and I've heard it, and I've seen some friends that have gone into MLRO roles and very quickly left the business because that culture wasn't right. And to me, while people may want to comment on that organisation I previously worked for, we had an amazing AML and financial crime and compliance system. And when we were ever challenged, in a healthy way, when we said no, those were always sort of formally respected and agreed. But there is that tension, yes.
So coming from like my personal perspective, that like visibility of all the data points that you've pulled together to make to inform a decision, I think where it falls down oftentimes is that there isn't that visibility because the right systems aren't in place. So it then becomes a qualitative thing rather than a quantitative thing.
Yeah, and look, there's some of it where it's an absolute, this is an AML and compliance, this is just a no. Yeah. Because they're a sanctioned entity, there's this, it's whatever. So they're absolute. Then there are areas of grey. And that's probably the more interesting part of the role. And that's where the healthy tension. But actually there, it's where it's putting that case together, but it's not you putting the case together, it's the business putting the case together and then getting the right people in the room to review it, make the decision, write your sort of workings out. So should anything ever sort of go wrong, there's a decision that we've done it because of this reason, this was the facts we based it on. But yeah, and there should always be that healthy tension because they're trying to push, but it's knowing where those areas of grey start and stop, and there's that really red line you don't go past.
Yeah, of course. So you left banking, you went into a FinTech. That FinTech unfortunately ended up in what was the word?
Insolvency.
Insolvency.
Yeah.
Then you're probably thinking, another FinTech, or should I go back to the safe haven of banking? Like, what was your mindset at that time?
I was lucky. I was asked to sort of stay on and help them sort of wind. So again, a learning for me. I've seen a FinTech grow materially, then spectacularly sort of crash and sort of wake up every morning with it on the news, which was not nice for a couple of weeks.
Yeah, I'm sure.
But then you sort of unwind it. You get all those sort of regulatory sort of discussions you've got to have. You go through them again, you learn. But then actually I met and built an amazing team. I worked with some of the best people. I had ex-regulators with me, and the amount that we learned from each other was amazing. Yeah. There's no way I could go back and do a job in a bank because I wanted, silly enough, to go and do it all over again. Because
sucker for punishment.
Yeah, but it's that whole enjoyment of going, I've learnt there, I've got a whole load of experience, and that's when I joined sort of Shieldpay, and they were sort of in that sort of startup sort of to growing up phase as a FinTech grows through. But they needed to have all the systems, controls in place to scale and scale safely. Yep. So you don't end up on the sort of the regulators' naughty sort of step. But actually going through that and being able to say, learnt this, all those experiences you come over, it was just, no, I could never go back into
because you wouldn't be utilised, right? Because you've got this now broad experience and you're a very specific thing.
Yeah.
in a bank. So now you've gone into, how long have you been at Shieldpay now?
Coming up to 4 years in June.
Jeez, does it feel like 40 years or a year?
No, it sounds like we've been through there for sort of about 20 years, because just how quickly you're changing.
Yeah.
And how the business is growing, its customer base is growing. So it's been a fun time.
Sounds like you're enjoying it.
Yeah.
And it feels like it's just given everything that you've said, it feels like it's a culmination of like all the stuff you did in hospitality and how you're engaging with people to the banking. It's all just come together.
Yeah.
It feels like a great role for you, given everything you know.
Yeah, and I could never go in, if I ever moved away from sort of Shieldpay, I'd go back and stay in the FinTech space, but it would never go into one that was nicely set up, had everything. It would be going in to help a FinTech rebuild its systems.
Yeah.
Because actually, if you get the foundations right, you can control it. It's all on your sort of watch.
Yeah.
And that's the fun part of going out, acquiring the systems, building it all up, training people, implementing them. That's all the sort of fun part, as well as doing all your sort of typical admin that you must do as an MLRO and head of compliance.
Love it. For me, that's fascinating, just to hear the whole journey end to end and how it's all pieced together. So thanks very much for your time.
And that concludes another episode of Not What I Expected. I hope you loved that as much as I loved recording it. If you like it, let us know. If you don't, tell us how you think it could be better. Thanks, and see you again.